Coming up on this episode, another look at the current Jonathan Kuminga situation as his stalemate with the Golden State Warriors continues into September. What will happen if Kaminga takes the unthinkable route and accepts the $7.9 million qualifying offer? Well, I'll go through one thing the Warriors could do to salvage what would be a disastrous situation. Welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. I'm back. I'm at home. I'm feeling refreshed after 5 to 6 weeks of traveling. It was a big trip back, going from Orlando to Charlotte, Charlotte to London, London to Singapore, Singapore to Melbourne, Melbourne to Hobart. But I'm back now, as I said, feeling refreshed and kind of using this little break as a refresher for the podcast as well. Looking forward to a big season ahead and have a few things in store for you guys to look out for later in the week. So look forward to that. But I thought I'd get into another episode here talking about Jonathan Kuminga, which is a little bit unfortunate. We did it countless times before I went on my holiday at the start of August. And now I come back. It's now the 7th of September in America, or 8th of September, Monday morning for me in Australia. And we are still talking about the Jonathan Kuminga situation. It is wild. I thought when I left to travel overseas that something would happen while I was away, still not to be the case. And who knows, with the October 1 deadline for the qualifying offer still some weeks away, we could still be a while until we get a resolution on Jonathan Kuminga's future and, of course, the subsequent signings that the Warriors are expected to make beyond that. We did have a domino of sorts fall, though, of course, last week or earlier in the week, depending on what time you're listening or watching to this, and that was Cam Thomas signing his $6 million qualifying offer with the Brooklyn Nets. So I think the initial thought was, well, this helps JK. This is showing that the threat of the qualifying offer is legitimate, that it's not just a threat, that it's actually something that could be well and truly in play, because that's what we've seen with Cam Thomas. And obviously he's the first of the 4 major restricted free agents to have his future settled. Obviously, there's Kaminga, Josh Giddey, and Quentin Grimes as well. I think Kaminga and Giddey are the 2 major ones, obviously, as the 6th and 7th overall picks from the 2021 NBA draft. But I do think like Kaminga would look at this and say, hey, Warriors, like I am seriously considering this. And the fact that Cam Thomas has just done it with the Nets does show that there is some validity to this, that I'm not just using it as a threat for you to up your offer, even though I still think that's very much part of it. Now, the thing with Thomas and Kaminga, I suppose, in those 2 comparisons is that it is quite different of a situation. Now, we might have a scenario where both players end up taking the qualifying offer. Obviously, Thomas has, but I think their pathway to getting to the qualifying offer is very different. So from what we've heard about the Cam Thomas situation is that this was very much a scenario where you've got a young player who's, again, with no teams out there with cap space, like there wasn't really the rival interest in Cam Thomas that he and his camp might have initially expected, obviously, when they didn't get an extension done before October's deadline last year. And now you get to a situation where, again, no money in free agency, and there's no real ability to go out and get a big offer sheet, obviously. And from a Brooklyn Nets perspective, like Cam Thomas, maybe once seen as like a real shining light young player in a veteran team. Well, now they've completely rebuilt. They've just taken 5 first-round picks. He's no longer the star young player, and they're no longer going to be wanting to necessarily feature him heavily moving forward. So from Brooklyn's perspective, why do we need to give you a big contract? The report from Shams was that they offered, I think, was it 2 years, 30 or something like that, with a second-year team option, similar to what the Warriors are offering Kaminga, with a 2-year 45 with a second-year team option. And then I think there was a 1-year $9 or $11 million contract or something in there where he wouldn't have a no-trade clause. Obviously, accepting the qualifying offer gives the player essentially a no-trade clause for the full season and then allows them to become an unrestricted free agent next off-season. So from Thomas's perspective, you look around, you look at that Brooklyn team, you look at all the young players, you think to yourself, well, I'm not going to get much opportunity here. There's no real rival team coming hard for me with a big offer, so there's nothing really for me to accept there. And at the end of the day, like if you're in it's the best offer you can possibly get from Brooklyn is a 2-year, $30 million contract with a second-year team option. Well, let's say that's only $15 million of guaranteed money. Then you're talking about you're only giving up $9 million, right? $9 million in this situation by taking the qualifying offer. So I think it's still a lot easier for Cam Thomas to take the qualifying offer as opposed to Kaminga, where you're talking about a 2-year, $45 million contract offer. Again, second-year team option, but I would be absolutely shocked if the Warriors or whoever team Kaminga is on, whichever team Kaminga is on by next offseason, I would be shocked if that's declined and he's allowed to become an unrestricted free agent. Of course, that's exactly why Kaminga's not accepting it at this stage. But if he doesn't accept it, then all of a sudden you're turning down what I think is $45 million. I know it's only 1 year of guarantee, but again, I would be shocked if a team declined that option. Again, if you're the Warriors, you're not letting Kaminga walk this offseason, so why would you let him walk next offseason kind of thing? And if you're a rival team that's just traded for him, well, you're not going to let him walk a few months after acquiring him when assuming you've given up something of value that the Warriors wanted in return. Like, you're not going to give that up straight away after just a few months. You're going to want to see another year of him before you make a contract decision. So, again, I'd be shocked if Kaminga's second year on that team as a team option, if he was to sign that, I'd be shocked if it got declined. And so, therefore, again, you're giving up $45 million for $7.9 million. Obviously, that's a much bigger gap than what Cam Thomas had proposed to him in terms of the contract offer from the Nets as opposed to the qualifying offer. From a Warrior perspective as well, they're also valuing Kaminga, and this is why I think there's still a situation where you want to get a deal done that's not the qualifying offer, because Kaminga still is the young stud for the Warriors. He is their primary high upside piece of their young core. They don't have 5 first-round picks coming in the door like Brooklyn. They still want to try, hopefully in some universe, they want there to be a world where Jonathan Kuminga thrives with their team and becomes a long-term piece for them. So I think his value to the Warriors is still more significant than probably what Thomas's value to the Nets is, which makes this situation very, very different. You've also got the scenario where, again, Thomas didn't have much in the way of rival interest. Kaminga has some real legitimate interest from the Sacramento Kings and Phoenix Suns, and it's something that Bleacher Report's Jake Fisher said on his Insider Notebook on Friday in regard to Kaminga and his stance on taking the qualifying offer if the Warriors don't up their contract. So this is a direct quote from Fisher, who said, "Kaminga and his position has been emboldened by the fact that he has received legitimate interest from other teams, most notably the Sacramento Kings and the Phoenix Suns, because that money has at least been out there on the table conceptually." And what he means by conceptually is, obviously they can't offer that in an offer sheet because they don't have the salary room, and the Warriors would probably just match anyway. Maybe. Well, that's what Fisher said. I don't know. Like, if the Suns had the room to offer 4 years, 90, right, as an offer sheet, would the Warriors match that? I don't know, but it's a hypothetical scenario anyway because they don't have the cap room to do that. So when he means conceptually, he means this is an offer that those teams have put on the table if a sign and trade can get done, obviously. But because that money's at least been out there on the table conceptually, that has led Jonathan Kuminga to anchor down and put his feet in the sand and say that he has no reason to take the 2-year, $45 million that Golden State has offered. So to me, like, that's saying, well, Kuminga's, he can't get the money from Phoenix or Sacramento because the Warriors obviously have to agree to a sign and trade. But I think there's probably a thought here that, hey, look at the teams that have interest in me now. If I take the qualifying offer, that those teams are probably still going to have interest in me next offseason. Maybe I might not get the exact same amount of money, but I'm still going to get a fairly significant contract, so long as I don't absolutely blow things up. But the Warriors, obviously, there's a huge risk involved for both teams here if Kuminga takes the qualifying offer. The risk for the Warriors is that, obviously, he just departs. He gets a no-trade clause, so you can't move him, really. And then, obviously, you have next offseason, he's an unrestricted free agent. And after all this mess, what are the chances of the Warriors re-signing Jonathan Kuminga as an unrestricted free agent? I would say 0%, 0.1% maybe, if you're being generous. And then from the Kuminga standpoint, well, if you sign the qualifying offer, that would piss the Warriors off a little bit. And then, obviously, they're able to dictate, and Steve Kerr's able to dictate what kind of role you get, what kind of playing time you get. And if you get nothing or very little, which is probably the likelihood to happen, because you'd basically be saying, well, I'm not a part of your long-term future, and therefore the Warriors would be saying, well, why do we need, if you're not going to contribute to winning, which has been the big question mark over your first 4 years, and you're also not a big part of our future, why would we play you for more than like 15 minutes a game? And therefore, if he has a season of that, a team's really going to be lining up to offer him significant money in free agency next offseason. Like that's going to be the balance that Jonathan Kuminga is trying to find right now, and the difficulty in deciding whether or not to take this qualifying offer or not to kind of take the risk of the Warriors basically shutting him out for a year, and then hoping that the likes of the Kings and the Phoenix Suns still have interest next offseason. It's going to be fascinating. What I do want to say more so, and what I want to get into from a roster building standpoint here in regard to the Warriors. In fact, before I get into that, it was also just finishing up on Fisher's report on Friday. It was interesting that he mentioned that teams are coming back into the practice, teams and players are coming back into practice facilities this upcoming week or next weekend kind of thing. And that could create a little bit of tension and pressure on the front office. And so Fisher specifically said, like, what happens if Steph gets into the building, if Jimmy Butler gets into the building, looks around, and there's, 7 other contracted players on the roster? Like, does that force or bring Steph Curry to a point where he might go to Mike Dunleavy Jr., to Joe Lacob and say, hey, come on, we either want Jonathan Kuminga or we don't. Let's get a resolution to this. Because the more time you go, if you've got like much of the team coming in to start practicing by the next 7 days, obviously beyond that, if you've still only got 9 guys on the main roster, you're losing the opportunity to train together. You're losing the opportunity to build chemistry. That's a big factor here in the Warriors trying to chase a 5th championship with Steph Curry as their franchise superstar. So if you're Steph, you have a big say. He's a very selfless superstar in terms of he's never been one to go to the front office and demand them to do this by this date or whatever else. He lets them, obviously he's tuned into everything that's going on, but he doesn't force things upon them, like other superstars have in the past. So does he go a little bit further, I suppose, and just try to exercise his power a little bit more than what he usually does, and say, come on, let's get things rolling here. Either up your offer to Kaminga, which is what I think the Warriors should do. I think just guarantee the 2 years. That's what I think the meeting point between the two sides should be here. Guarantee the 2 years, have a 2-year, $45 million contract, no options, no player option, no team option, just 2 years, $45 million. Hopefully that Kaminga will accept that, bring him back, see how it goes to start the season, and you'll still have the flexibility to trade him mid-season if things go right, which they probably will, but who knows? We'll wait and see. But will Steph or Jimmy even go to the front office, go to ownership and say, come on, it's early September here. We're actually ramping back up towards training camp. We're trying to ramp up back to a situation where we want to build some chemistry here. We want to get the team rolling. We want to, kick off the season in a positive note. And this is not really doing that by holding out Jonathan Kuminga and therefore subsequently holding up the signings of Al Horford, DeAnthony Melton, whoever else, Gary Payton II, whoever else it might be in free agency after that. So that'll be interesting. But in terms of Kaminga taking the qualifying offer and what the Warriors could possibly do here after, I should say, that happens. So if he does the unthinkable, which at this point is maybe not the unthinkable, like I think initially everyone thought, oh, he won't do that. Like that's just silly. But I do think we've got to a point here where this is a legitimate option for Kaminga, and perhaps, according to multiple reports, the likely option, particularly if the Warriors don't up their offer. So what can the Warriors do in terms of their roster building? Because I think a lot of us have often pointed to, well, these other guys, Horford, Melton, Payton, whoever else, are holding out because if Kaminga takes the qualifying offer, that opens up a little bit more room for them. I disagree. I don't think I would be giving Al Horford, DeAnthony Melton, Gary Payton II, whichever other free agent on the market. I wouldn't be giving them more money. Now, you might give Horford a 2-year, $11 million contract where he gets a second-year player option and see if he wants to come back to the Warriors the following season, or obviously ponder retirement as he has over the last couple of seasons as well. But that doesn't do anything for your annual payroll, right? That's still the same. He's still on the taxpayer mid-level exception of $5.5 million kind of thing. So instead of adjusting contracts for the prospective free agents that are coming in, the Warriors could get access to something that's going a little bit under the radar here and has been a little bit forgotten in regard to their roster building, and that is the Kyle Anderson $8.8 million trade exception. The reason that's going under the radar and is basically being forgotten about, because if Kaminga comes back on anything significant, and I'm talking anything more than $15 million per year, the Warriors are going to be so close, or in fact, they're going to be over the first tax apron, which eliminates their possibility from everything I've read. Teams over the first apron cannot use a pre-existing trade exception. Therefore, again, if Kaminga takes anything more than like $12 million a year, basically, the Warriors are going to be over the first apron. Okay. Therefore, that trade exception for the Kyle Anderson trade exception gets washed away. It becomes eliminated. You cannot use it. If Kaminga takes the qualifying offer, all of a sudden, that trade exception comes into play a little bit. And so the Warriors right now, about $25 million under the first apron. If you think about $7.9 million for Jonathan Kuminga, you think about $5.5 million for Al Horford, and then you think about a few minimum contracts, right, to DeAnthony Melton, GP2, whoever, maybe Will Richard gets a contract as a late second-round pick for payroll purposes. The Warriors could be left over, not with the full $8.8 million trade exception, but maybe they could use $4 to $6 million of it, right? And still fit in under that first apron. And instead of signing a 14th guy as a free agent, would you not prefer maybe to sign Horford, Melton, if it's going to be Payton, which I disagree with? I spoke about that last episode while I was in America in terms of I'd prioritize Malcolm Brogdon over GP2, but whatever. Whoever gets the 13th spot, instead of signing Seth Curry or whatever as a 14th guy, would you not go out, try and use that trade exception for a player making, let's say, between $4 or $6 million, which is more likely to get you a difference-making player, right? And so that's what becomes available to Golden State if Kaminga takes the qualifying offer. It's the one piece of this, because it would be a disaster. Kaminga taking the qualifying offer would be a disaster, no doubt about it. But it's the one thing that you could point to and say, that's the silver lining. Right, it's not much of a silver lining, but potentially it could become a major silver lining if you get a player that develops and becomes a significant piece for you, right? Because that is a roster building tool that you would not otherwise have if Kaminga doesn't take the qualifying offer. So again, that's the one piece of this that the Warriors could get. And I tell you what, if Kaminga does take the qualifying offer, if I'm the Warriors, as a fan, like I'm saying, you better use that trade exception to some degree. Because again, that's the only thing you get out of this, essentially. You better use it. You better use that. Otherwise, it is a complete disaster. And it's still probably going to be a disaster nonetheless. But that's something you're going to have to use. And looking at some of the players, right, who are making, $8.8 million or less, there's obviously a lot of good players, a lot of veteran players. You've got guys that are potentially guys that are extension eligible off rookie contracts this offseason. If they don't get deals done with their current team, did they become trade candidates, and then the Warriors could get a look at them for a year before potentially re-signing them or something like that? So you got guys coming off their rookie contracts. You got veteran players either on the minimum or more so likely to be, the Horford types, whether on the non-taxpayer mid-level exception kind of thing. So listing some names here of guys making $8.8 million or less. Brook Lopez, obviously we spoke about him before for Angie. He's not likely to become available unless things go completely south at the Clippers, which obviously there's plenty of drama there at the moment with the whole Kawhi aspiration situation. So we'll wait and see what plays out there. I still expect the Clippers to be vying for a championship next season. They've obviously got a very experienced veteran team. They're looking to contend. They're not going to be blowing it up, you wouldn't have thought, but if something happens with this Kawhi situation, something even more dramatic, then who knows? Goga Batarte has been a player that I think when this trade exception really came to light, you looked at him as a player at the Magic, where they've kind of got three bigs with Mo Wagner, Wendell Carter Jr. as well as himself. Do they look to move on? Do they look to move on him? Possibly. Kelly Oubre Jr., but the Warriors ain't doing that, obviously. George Niang at Utah is an interesting one, come mid-season. Obviously an experienced veteran player at a young team that's rebuilding. Again, you could throw them a pick and see if, they would give you George Niang. Again, this trade exception, for those that don't know, a trade exception basically means you can absorb a salary of a player up to the trade exception. So again, it's Kyle Anderson's $8.8 million. The Warriors can absorb a player making up to that money without sending out another salary. So basically, it would just be picks for whoever you're picking up here. Again, of course, the Warriors wouldn't be able to absorb if that's taking them over the first tax apron. So again, that's why I think the 8.8 you probably won't be able to use, but 4 to 6 million, maybe the Warriors can squeeze that in. Bringing Kevon Looney back. Again, all these guys I'm kind of mentioning at the higher point of that 8 million. So the Warriors probably have to try and create a little bit of wiggle room to be able to get these guys on, in a trade exception while also staying under the first apron. Bringing Looney back, not going to happen, but thought it was funny anyway. They did it obviously with GP2 a couple of years ago after he headed to Portland in free agency. Dean Wade, there was a bit of speculation about him earlier in the offseason. And then a list of guys here that might actually be in the price range if the Warriors do have $4 to $6 million to squeeze in here. I think the biggest one of all these in terms of would come reasonably cheap and has some chemistry with a Warrior star player and could be a potential 15, 20-minute rotation player for you, Haywood Highsmith. So we saw the Miami Heat just dump him to the Brooklyn Nets a few weeks ago, basically for payroll reasons. He's on, I think, a $5.6 million contract for this upcoming season. Again, that might be enough for the Warriors to be able to squeeze that in. Of course, a former teammate of Jimmy Butler, 3-and-D forward type, the Warriors could always do with someone like that who can knock down the three ball at a reasonable rate and defend at a reasonable level. Obviously coming off a bit of an injury as well, so I think the Nets are probably going to want to try and rehabilitate his value at the start of the season and then look to move him mid-season, but I can absolutely guarantee you he will not be part of the Brooklyn Nets beyond the mid-season trade deadline. So that gives you a real opportunity for any team, and particularly a team like the Warriors, if they have access to this trade exception, flick a couple of picks to the Nets. You'd think it'd be a couple of second-round picks, which the Warriors don't have many of, to be fair, but maybe they can acquire one or do something. And I wouldn't have thought it's a first-round pick necessarily for Haywood Highsmith, but a couple of seconds might get the job done there. In terms of the Clippers, again, Nick Batum, Bradley Beal, if things go completely awry, but I don't expect that to happen. Nick Richards is a player who the Warriors have sort of been linked to by the matter of Kaminga in terms of the Suns seem to have offered like Royce O'Neal, Nick Richards, and a couple of second-round picks. I think that was their initial, or multiple second, might have been up to 4 second-round picks. That was kind of their initial sign and trade offer to the Warriors for Kaminga, which Golden State obviously rejected. But Nick Richards is a guy with Malawach coming in and obviously Mark Williams as well. He's kind of gone down the pecking order. And I do think the Warriors, with Horford coming in, one of the underrated things about Horford to me is his ability to play at the 4 and for Steve Kerr to potentially look at double big lineups. And therefore, like, you could look, I don't think the Warriors desperately need another center if they've got Horford, QP, and Trace Jackson Davis, but it's not something you'd rule out either. Like, I'm not ruling out trading for a center. So Nick Richards is a possibility. Another big one here, and this falls into the rookies who are extension eligible. Walker Kessler. Obviously, there's been a lot of trade speculation in regard to him over recent years at Utah and whether they want to hold on to him long term. Well, we're really going to get a decision on that because he's extension eligible this offseason. And if there's not a deal done before October, then perhaps mid-season you look at something where Walker Kessler becomes available via trade, or more so available than what he has been in the past. And that's a player I think he's making $4.4 million this season or something. Do you look at him, maybe a first-round pick or two, going to the Jazz and being able to absorb his salary as a part of that Kyle Anderson trade exception? And then if the Bucks don't start off the season well and Giannis is asking out and things go completely south there, then Taurean Prince and Gary Trent Jr. are a couple of players that are making just above the minimum, I think, who could also fit into that trade exception. So there's a bunch of players there who the Warriors could look at targeting. I think Highsmith is certainly the most realistic one. And if you want to try and get a long-term piece and a guy who's still seriously talented and young, I think Walker Kessler is probably the other one there as well. But we will wait and see. I just want to put that on the radar that if Kaminga does end up signing this qualifying offer, then the Warriors would want to be trying to use part of that trade exception. I think that's more valuable than simply giving a little bit more money to Horford, because I suppose they could also open up the full mid-level exception and just split that up between Horford, Melton, whoever else. But why do that when you could go and use it on another player making a little bit more kind of thing? I don't know. We'll wait and see. But I think I just wanted to put out there the trade exception, the Kyle Anderson trade exception is still a possibility if Kaminga does sign the $7.9 million qualifying offer. I expect we'll still get a few more weeks of this, that something will probably happen in the final days of September before that October 1 deadline, where we're currently in a staring contest, and one of the two parties, whether it's Kaminga or the Warriors, will eventually blink and something will happen. But I'm still hoping that something might happen more imminently, potentially if Steph or Jimmy, go to the front office here in the next week and say, come on, let's figure something out. We're now midway through September. We're actually got full eyes on the season ahead now and are trying to build some chemistry and work towards that. So we will wait and see. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that would be greatly appreciated, and greatly appreciate everyone that's listening on their podcast feed as well. You can follow me at POK252. That's POK252 on Twitter, or X/Twitter. And it's great to be back. Great to be back, and looking forward to another big season ahead, and hope you guys can join me.